I'm Moira Stansfield for working purposes, but a lot of the children at Hazelwood know me as Moira Foster, so my married name. But
so what we'd like to know, because this is such a sort of institution in Palmer's Green, and for anyone who's been involved in Hazelwood will know it, for generations and generations, is how you got involved with the pantomime.
Well, when we moved into our house, our present house in Hazelwood Lane, the lady I bought it from, Lynn Woods, was a very keen parent supporter at Hazelwood School, and she said to me, when your child's going to school, do choose Hazelwood School. I'm sure you'll have lots of friends there, as I have. You'll find lots of people you get on with, and particularly if you get involved with the pantomime, which I'd never heard of before. And so the year before Matthew started at school, which was a few years later, I went along and watched one of the pantomimes, and I was just absolutely blown away by how professional it was. At that time, Paul Bateman was playing piano for it. He was a professional composer and pianist. And just all the production qualities seemed to me so very special. I thought it was the most wonderful gift to the children. And so when I then encountered a lady called Anne Bateman, who was doing the costumes, we found we'd worked in the same company in the rag trade, making wedding dresses, designing them. She said, "Oh, great, you could take over the costumes when I leave." I said, "Oh, no, I don't do costumes. I work in the fashion end. It's very different." She said, "Oh, nonsense. I'm sure you can." I kept saying, no, I really can't. And she came round with a whole lot of lovely cloth that she'd managed to get from work and just sort of dumped it on me and said, "Oh, come on, I'm sure you can make a couple of costumes for me. I think it was the Ugly Sister, Cinderella and the Witch." And I still have those costumes, and the Witch in particular I have lent out now probably 50 times at least to people. And it was my sort of entree into the pantomime through that. Annie, of course, left about 2 years later, and I suddenly found I was doing not just 2 costumes, but all of them.
My goodness.
So it was really chance.
Chance, but
yes.
Someone who was very forceful.
Yes.
Coming along and saying,
positive, you could do it.
But also someone who knew your skills intimately, because if you'd worked together and she knew exactly what you were capable of.
Yes, well, she hadn't met me before, but we had worked sort of in the same place. And a lot of people involved with pantomime, like myself, had been at art college. That was the overwhelming feeling. I got lots of people who came from the same background as myself, which was absolute joy, because I hadn't encountered that in my working career, really. So that was lovely.
So do you have any idea of when the pantomime started?
Well, I think it had already been going probably 10 years. The first one that I did the costumes for was 1990. I'm pretty sure it had been going for 10 years before that, in slightly different form, obviously. And when I started there, Richard Wilmot was writing the pantomimes and directing them. And he'd certainly been involved for quite some time. But yes, it's got a fantastic long history. We can't quite put our finger on when it began, but it's a long time ago.
How did the group who ran the pantomime and acted in it, and did you all become quite close friends?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing I'm so grateful to it for, actually, because it's been the core of our friendship group since we've been at the school, really, and particularly since we left the school. So most of the things we do socially now have a sort of link back to the pantomime. And I've noticed it because I'm still involved, because I am still working at the school in a sort of freelance fashion, so I still do the costumes for them. And I've noticed it over the generations with the different people who've come in, exactly the same things happen, that their friendship groups have started with the pantomime and carried on beyond it. So it's really rather special.
That's amazing. How do you feel that the children respond to the pantomime each year, because you've been involved for so long?
Very, very well. I mean, when I first was involved, Jill Girling, as one of the teachers, used to get the children to do these lovely drawings of what they remembered of the panto with their written bits at the bottom of what they liked. It was fantastically good demonstration of how clever they were looking, because they had got so many details in their drawings, and the bits that they liked were quite varied, which was really, really good for the actors. So perhaps somebody who didn't feel they'd done that well had made a tremendous impact on several of the children. So I think it's something very special. It is live, which is very important. It's people that they may recognise from seeing somebody's mummy in the playground. Live music, I think, was wonderful, for them to have. And they were often, when I inherited it, they were not classic pantomime stories. We wrote our own stories, and I continued in Richard's way of doing that. Now we use the more classic stories, but they're still freshly written every year. So I think that's quite a special thing for children who never might go to theatre in any other way.
It is a very, very special thing, this a pantomime. It involves all the children, all the parents, and often people from the local area. I'll just touch on something that you mentioned about the writing of the pantomime, because that's obviously crucial.
It is, yes.
How long do you think it takes to write a pantomime?
Well, when I was writing it, because I started writing when Richard wasn't able to complete the script. He started a script which he'd called Zog in Space, and he just couldn't commit the time to it because he was involved with a local sort of campaign. And so Chrissy and myself took on that duty, which was quite comical, as neither of us had any idea of anything to do with space stories. So we sort of fumbled around rather, but we had fun doing it. We sat down together a couple of days, I think, writing, and then of course you tweak it. I think there's usually about 3 amendments to the entire script. When I wrote on my own after that, I would often be able to write it sort of in a day once I got the ideas in my head, but then of course you refine it over quite a long period. But once you know what the story is going to be, and you've got your classic characters, it's got a very formulaic sort of atmosphere about it in lots of ways. But that helps. But yes, about probably a couple of days actually of writing the initial script, which you then embarrass yourself by reading to the members of the cast.
Did the cast have an input there?
They often said they wanted to have. When push came to shove, they weren't that keen actually, because it's quite difficult if you introduce something, you have to follow it through, and that's quite difficult. That's more tiresome than just, obviously if people had great sort of lines to put in, then of course they'd come in, but most people in the end were quite happy to work with what was there.
So how is the writing handed on? Because this is almost like a magic talisman.
Well, as I say, I just assumed I had to do what Richard had done, which was to write something with a moral. He was very strong on morals, so it was anti-bullying or environmental sort of things. And so we sort of aimed for a core idea like that. And then you would always think of amusing names of the characters, and you knew you would have, the baddie with 2 henchmen or henchpersons, and the goodie, and, you had sort of certain characters that would definitely come up. And then I also made sure there was a little bit that was like a non-speaking interlude where people who wanted to be on stage but didn't particularly want to speak could be either a jellyfish in one case or a tree, and it was like almost like a little ballet episode. So you had to accommodate that, and you just knew you could only really, I think, allow 5 minutes a scene. So that sort of dominated what you did, and it had to obviously have the natural arc, where it's obviously all resolved at the end, and you get into adventures in the middle. And so it's sort of, I realised, because I'd always liked writing, but I'd never written anything like that it sort of had rules that helped you. And I suppose I did go and talk to Richard a couple of times, but he was very, like Annie, he said, "Oh, rubbish, you can do it. Go on, do it yourself," which is perhaps the best way to hand things on, isn't it? Just with loads of confidence, the person will do it their own way.
And who did you hand it on to?
Simon Bennett, who... He was one of the parents when I was chair of PTA, and I had an evening of presenting things that we did. I had a sort of board for people to sign up on, and Simon signed up, and he was there when I was directing for a long time, took the baton and with great gusto, and he carried on and wrote very well with friends. He liked writing in the committee group.
Oh, that's lovely. Thanks, Moira. I
Thank
think
you.
we've got a lot there.
Yeah.